Good morning, everyone. Happy Sabbath. How many of you enjoyed the fireworks last Tuesday night? You guys have? I was in Vegas. Woo! Right? But it wasn't that fun because it was 120 degree over there. I was melting. We had a Korean missionaries who did their ministry here for the last 3 months, and they're leaving tonight. So we wanted to show them, there's some other things in America rather than just LA. And it was a fun trip for them. It was exhausting trip for me because I was the one driving. But anyway, last Saturday we talked about 4th of July and how it's important to have a freedom, liberation in our life. And now we are today covering the book of Exodus again, and we are going to study chapter 13. The title here that you see, what is it, everyone? From Bondage to Blessing. So last Saturday, I told you about Koreans fighting for the freedom. Do you remember that story? So my question is, do you think every single Korean was fighting for the liberation of Korea, yes or no? No. There were big portion of Koreans who actually supported Japanese to rule Korea. And they thought Korea was over. This is not going to happen. We're not going to have our country back. So then let's support Japan. And at the same time, when Japan was trying to take over Korea, they needed support from Korean officers to avoid appearing as a colonial power. So there were 5 Korean officers who pushed the king to sign the treaty that placed Korea under Japanese administration. So as you can tell in this picture, they already adopted Japanese customs, such as wearing modern clothing, and they cut their hair like Western people. And this picture would describe you the dynamic at the time. The king's here, and the Japanese is here, and it's actually Korean people, persuading king that, hey, you need to sign this treaty. But at the same time, there were other Koreans fighting for the freedom and everything. But it wasn't really Korean freedom fighters who really got us the freedom back. What was it? Do you know? What was the main event that the Japanese, the government, the king, eventually had to say, we surrender with no condition? The bombing on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And before this, Japan was warned many times. If you don't end the war now, there will be consequences. But they ignore that. And they call it moksak, like a muksar in Korean and muksak in Japanese. And it can be translated into 2 ways. Either you ignore or no comment. But the Americans perceived it that they were ignoring them when Japanese were just trying to no comment. But as a result, the 2 bombs got dropped. They're saying that about 140,000 people, that was a casualty, and then every building, everything was all gone. So eventually in August 14, 1945, the Emperor of Japan made an announcement through the radio that we are surrendering, and you see the Japanese people listening to that, and they were very sad, and they were crying and everything, and now you see that they are signing the peace treaty between Japan and the United States. Then what happened to Korea after the war was over? Who were the 2 winning countries in World War II? The Soviet Union and USA. There were 2 of those winning countries. So they divided Korea to half. So in North Korean part, Soviet Union came in, and then the South Korean territory, the American troops came in. So they divided the Korea in half over the 38th parallel. So until that time, people were still able to travel, like from South Korea to North Korea and everything, until a couple of years later. And this is what I'm going to try to say today. So last week, I showed you this beautiful Japanese admin building that they built right in front of the Korean palace, remember? And in front of that building, it used to be a Japanese flag. But then when the U.S. troops came, now they put the American flag there. And now the military government, they were trying to establish Korean government. And you may think that since now the Japan is big and the Americans came in, everyone, those who supported Japan should be prosecuted, right? Because they were traitors. Do you think that's what happened? No, when Americans are trying to establish the government, the people with the proper education and skills were those who helped Japanese. Because all the freedom fighters, they didn't have a chance to get education. They didn't have those privileges. But those who helped, supported Japan, they were able to get proper education and everything. So the U.S. government decided to empower the pro-Japanese people to run Korean government. And this decision casted a seed for the division among Koreans for the generations to come. Because those pro-Japanese people were able to build their wealth again, even after the liberation, because the position that they got by betraying their own people. Many Korean politicians, even today, are accused to be a descendant of those pro-Japanese people. So you see, in this world, the liberation doesn't mean that you can clean everything. You can wipe everything away. You can wipe it out. As we study the book of Exodus, the whole book is about liberating Israelites from the bondage of slavery and also from the curse of this godless culture. So when God is bringing the Israelites, He was trying to make sure that the things that I just shared with you, the liberation, they could not really cut all those ties to the past. And now in chapter 13, God is teaching us through their journey how we can cut all the past when God is liberating us from the curse of sin and bondage of slavery. So let's go to chapter 13, and starting from verse 1. It says, "And then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, 'Consecrate to me all the firstborn, whatever opens the womb among the children of Israel, both of man and beast, it is mine.'" In chapter 12, what happened in chapter 12? Finally, after the 10 plagues, Pharaoh is allowing Israelites to go. So now chapter 13, God is preparing them. And what is the first step? Consecrate. In this verse, we see God commanding the Israelites to consecrate every firstborn, both human and animal, as a way of acknowledging their deliverance from slavery. This act of consecration served as a reminder that they belong to God and were set apart for His purposes. Similarly, as believers, we are called to consecrate our lives to God, recognizing His redemptive work in our lives through Jesus Christ. This is our journey to where? The promised land. Where is the promised land for us? The heavenly kingdom that He has prepared for us. And God didn't say here that you consecrate once you get to the promised land, yes or no? No, before you get to the promised land, before you even leave, Egypt, you consecrate. It means that in this journey that we are taking, is it fair to say that we need to consecrate ourselves to embark this journey? Yes or no? Yes. So the first thing God asked them, consecrate. Consecrate. The firstborn. And you may think, well, I'm not the firstborn. I have an older brother, Well, I'm not the youngest in the family. I'm not the firstborn, so do I have to be consecrate myself? Well, the firstborns at the time were the ones who were supposed to die, right? But by the blood of the Lamb that they put on their doorpost, they were saved, right? So firstborn means who were supposed to die because of their sin, which means all of us. You and I, we are all firstborns. But then by the blood of Jesus Christ, right? That He shed on the cross, now that curse is gone. But at the same time, God says, well, it's not over. Now you need to consecrate yourself. It means all of us today, we need to make a decision to consecrate. Romans 12:1, it says, therefore I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, there's still mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Paul is telling us how we ought to live. And what does it mean that we give our body as a living sacrifice? Luke 9:23 and 24, it says, then he said to them all, if anyone desires to come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow me. For whoever desires to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will save it. So what does it mean? Consecrate ourselves. It means denying myself. To offer our bodies as a living sacrifice is to make daily decisions that my desires must die, so that I can be free to do with my body what God desires. Do you see the challenge today? It's not your body. You see where I'm going? This is what God is telling us. Yes, my desires must die so that I can be free to do with my body, but what God desires. With my body, I do what God desires. Then how can we make daily decisions that align with God's desire? Now God is giving Israelites instruction how you can make it possible. So verse 3, it says, and Moses said to the people, remember this day in which you went out of Egypt, out of the house of bondage, for by strength of hand the Lord brought you out of this place. And he says, no leavened bread shall be eaten. 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread, and on the seventh day there shall be a feast to the Lord. Unleavened bread shall be eaten 7 days. And no leavened bread shall be seen among you, nor shall leaven sin among you in all your quarters. What's up with the leavened bread? Why God keep talking about unleavened bread, unleavened bread? Notice here, God instructed the Israelites to observe the feast of unleavened bread as a memorial of their liberation from Egypt. During this feast, they were to remove all leaven from their household for 7 days. Leaven symbolizes sin and corruption. This feast reminds us that when God redeems us, He calls us to leave behind the sin and impurity that once enslaved us. We are to walk in righteousness and holiness, continually seeking to live a life pleasing to God. So in order for us to find out what God desires in our life, we have to remove the leaven, the sin. Why? Because Isaiah 59 verse 2, it says, "But your iniquities have separated you from your God. Your sins have hidden his face from you so that he will not hear." So in our journey to our promised land, once you consecrate yourself, now we have to remove whatever that would be, but that separate us from God. Anything that I would put before God, can we say that it's your idol? It can be my career, it can be my relationship, it can be anything. And God says, you have to take unleavened bread. How many of you have tasted unleavened bread? Raise your hand. Does it taste good? Mm-mm. I'd rather have a sourdough. The thing is, the way that God is giving it doesn't taste good. It doesn't really have a lot of fun in it. Are you following? And sometimes, I want this sandwich with all the things in it. And God says, no, unleavened bread. It means despite of my desire. Now, when God is telling us to eat this unleavened bread, and maybe taking or getting rid of all the things that may distract me from God, it may taste nothing. It doesn't taste like sweet or anything, but that's how we can be free from the bondage and cutting all the shadow from the past. And after that, not only this, God says you have a responsibility to teach your children about this unleavened bread, the concept of unleavened bread. Because this is the law of God, and it's something that you need to teach your children. He continues to say, "And you shall tell your son in that day, saying, 'This is done because of what the Lord did for me when I came up from Egypt.' It shall be as a sign to you on your hand, as a memorial between your eyes." And different translation says, that's your forehead. That the Lord's law may be in your mouth, for with a strong hand the Lord has brought you out of Egypt. You shall therefore keep this ordinance in its season from year to year. It shall be as a sign on your hand and as frontlet between your eyes, for by strength of hand the Lord brought us out of Egypt. So what God is telling is that, you know what? You have to teach this unleavened bread, which is the law of God, something that you have to follow, the instruction, and you put it where? Between your eyes, on your forehead. But what do we have in our forehead? What do we have in your forehead? You have your brain in your head, and the brain has many functions, but specifically under your forehead, we have something called frontal lobe. And when your frontal lobe has different functions here, and when it is aligned with the will of God, now it does problem solving. Then what we do when we solve the problems, you would think, what would Jesus do in this situation? And the judgment. Now you have discernment between good and evil. Inhibition, meaning you have a discipline. Like, I'm not supposed to do this. I'm not allowed to do this. Personality, you may have Christ-like character. Emotional trait, you may have a loving, caring, unselfish character. Language, production, using the language reflecting God's character. Are you following? This is why God said, you put it between your eyes, in your forehead, and you teach this to your children. The true liberation from the sin will be manifested by the actions of God's true followers. As Christians, we are called to have a visible mark of God's redemption in our lives. Our actions and attitude should reflect the transformation that God has worked in us. We are to be a living testimony to His grace and love. And continue, now we are at verse 17. Then it came to pass, when Pharaoh had let the people go, that God did not lead them by the way of the land of the Philistines, although that was near. For God said, lest perhaps the people change their minds when they see war and return to Egypt. So God led the people around by way of the wilderness of the Red Sea. And then children of Israel went up in orderly ranks out of the land of Egypt. So notice here that there was a shortcut to get to the promised land, but God did not lead them to that route. Why is that? Because the Israelites were not ready to face the battle against the Philistines and people living there. Sometimes God leads us on unexpected path in our lives. We may question the detours and delays, but we must remember that God's ways are higher than our ways. He has a purpose for every twist and turn, and we can trust His guidance. Sometimes we notice that God is leading us to the wilderness and the Red Sea for a reason. We may not fully understand why in that moment God is doing that, but Exodus 13 teaches us that God's wisdom surpasses our own when He guides us on this unexpected path. In my personal life, I have encountered numerous detours. So recently I was ordained. It was a tremendous blessing. However, like if I start to compare myself to my peers, the pastors, the people that I studied with in Andrews in 2007, many of them was ordained years before me. And also like things that happen in my personal life. Like sometimes I feel like I was wasting my time while I was waiting for my immigration document. And I'm just like sitting there doing nothing for months and months and months because there was literally, I couldn't do anything. I could not work or anything. So I was just sitting doing nothing for several months. And some young people here, when you now plan your life, you may feel like sometimes your life is not going to the direction that you desire. You want to make a progression, you want to go up, make your way up, but then now you feel like you're stuck. Now you feel like you're in the wilderness. And the thing is, you're not just sitting here in a room with AC on. You're in the wilderness. I was in Vegas at 120 degrees. I was melting. It was miserable. And think about it now, you are sitting in the wilderness under the heat during the day, in coldness during the night. And you may wonder, Lord, I have been faithful to you. Why this is happening? But there's a reason why God is taking you to the detour. It says here, God knows the perfect timing for each step of our journey. We must trust His wisdom, and not rush ahead of His plans. Patience and faith in His timing will ensure that we are prepared for the battles we will face. So as I reflected on my life, I realized all those detours that I took, they all played a part in my growth, humbling me and shaping me into a better person and a stronger Christian. God wanted me to grow, and He put me in a training. Even though I didn't like it, it was like unleavened bread. The taste awful. But God says, but this is the only way that I can cut you from the curse of sin. Verse 19, it says, and Moses took the bones of Joseph with him, for he had placed the children of Israel under solemn oath, saying, God will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones from here with you. So they took their journey from Sukkoth and camped in Etham at the edge of the wilderness. Joseph had a great life in Egypt, except his young age. He was a prime minister. He had a great life, but he knew that Egypt wasn't his home. And he asked his children, when you get out of here one day, take my bones with you, so that I may be buried in the promised land. We may all die here one day if Jesus is not coming back in our lifetime. But the thing is, my bones will not be buried here forever. Because you know what? My home is where? The heavenly kingdom. Verse 21, and the Lord went before them by day in a pillar of cloud to lead the way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, so as to go by day and night. He did not take away the pillar of cloud by day or the pillar of fire by night from before the people. And notice here, and the Lord went before them, meaning Israelites followed pillar of cloud and the pillar of fire. So in order for us to complete this journey to the kingdom of God and cutting the curse of sin from the past is to follow God's lead, meaning we don't go ahead of God. But how many times we would go ahead of God? I make my own plans already, and then now I'm asking, follow me, God, follow me. I have all my plans here, and that should be aligned with your plan, right? God, I'm praying that my will should be your will. Instead, your will should be my will, right? So I ahead of God, but what does it mean here? The pillars of fire, pillars of cloud, the function of those two were protecting them from the heat and from the coldness, from the scorpions and snakes and all the wild beasts in the desert, right? It means that if I go ahead of God, I'm not under the protection. And sometimes, as a consequence, me going before God, what happened? Now I'm facing challenges, and all of a sudden I complain to God, Lord, I thought you were going to protect me. Well, we don't realize that we went ahead of God. Are you following? So when they get sick, and some may die, the journey is not going to be pleasant. It means if we go before God, if we go ahead of God, the journey that we are taking will never be pleasant. Because there are enemies out there. And God is telling us, you follow me. We have to trust that God leads us in steps. But in steps, not once for all. It's not like one step and you're done. No, one step at a time, little by little. But we want to be at the top of the mountain in 10 seconds when it's supposed to take about like 2 hours, 5 hours, God teaches us through Exodus 13 how we come from the bondage to blessing. Yes, it will not be always easy, but God says, trust me and follow me. Leave everything that may distract you from our relationship because you are free. You are freed by the blood of my only begotten Son. And to you and I, God is telling you this. I'm going to take you on a journey. And we're going to walk across the sea, but I will be with you. And you do what's possible. You do the praise. I will do the miracle. I will make the way. You put your trust in me. You keep the faith. Then when you cannot go on, then I will do the miracle.